Hey there everyone, Marauders just finally dropped into early access this week, and after being pretty intrigued by the closed alpha test of this space pirate game that I played earlier this year back in May, I was pretty excited to load up my rust bucket and see what kind of loot awaited me in the outer reaches of space this time. So far, I'm definitely not disappointed. The game has improved a lot since the closed alpha, running smoother, looking better, and definitely feeling more fun to play in general, with improved weapon sounds, animations, and AI behavior that just makes everything a bit more immersive and fun to play. That being said, all of these extraction games have one thing in common. It can be kinda hard to get a good start and get a good foundation before you lose all your starter gear and end up broke, ill-equipped, and struggling. With that in mind, I just have some quick tips to share for anyone checking out Marauders for the first time that might help you get started, or maybe help you recover from some space pirate-induced financial devastation. To start this one off, I'll cover something really simple but easily missed if you don't explore your Rust Bucket ship too much. The Rust Bucket is the most basic ship, available free to all players every time you go out on a raid. And it also comes with a little bit of free basic gear that should spawn every single time you fly out into space with the Rust Bucket. If you check behind the stairs down to the airlock, you'll find a bench with a 9mm pistol, a box of ammo, and a pouch rig which gives you a few extra inventory slots. You can use this to your advantage in a few ways. First, and most obviously, you can go out into a raid with basically nothing equipped and then pick up this starter gear so you're never stuck with no weapons and gear. It can be a pretty effective strategy after a couple rough deaths. Just pick up the pistol and the rig, take down a couple AI with the pistol, and commandeer their weapons, armor, and helmet for yourself. Another thing you can do with the starter gear, at least the pistol anyways, is to just pick it up every time you do a raid in order to scrap it at the crafting screen in the main menu, which is a pretty solid way to slowly build up scrap parts for crafting better items as you unlock them. Next up, tip number 2 is about the starting phase of each raid, where all players load into their ships and it becomes a bit of a race to enter the instance without being shot down by someone else. You're not safe in this phase, and if you just spam W and go straight for the instance, sometimes you can end up being ganged up on by multiple other ships, making it kinda difficult to reach the docking bay unscathed. I like to start off this phase by going either up or down and using the floating debris and asteroids as cover, and setting myself up to be just a little bit behind the other ships or at least slightly out of their sight lines. By doing this, other Marauders become the big obvious targets out in front, and you can slip through the net and get to the airlock safely. There's also AI turrets and sometimes AI ships as well, so if you let other players take their aggro, you don't have to worry about them. And if you want, you can more easily ambush other players in their ships while they're distracted shooting at the other guys. Tip number 3 is to understand the usefulness of the escape pod, especially when you're just running the default Rust Bucket ship, since you don't have to care about losing it. The most obvious use of escape pods is to bail out of your ship when it gets damaged, but you can also use them offensively, or as a cheeky way to extract from the raid if you found something good and need to run away. You can use the escape pod to breach into other ships and attempt to steal them. So if you notice a player ship that's distracted by shooting someone else, you can quickly jump into your escape pod, get close to their ship, and breach it. Then if you take out the captain piloting the ship, it's yours and there's one less player to worry about. Make sure to also keep an eye out for larger AI piloted ships floating around as well, because you can breach them and then they can be filled with loot and enemies to take out for experience, and sometimes you can even pilot these ships and keep them for yourself. Finally, the last thing I'll say about escape pods is to keep your eyes peeled for the pods in the actual space stations that you're raiding. If you found some good loot or feel like you're in danger, taking the escape pods to the extraction is just as effective as taking your Rust Bucket ship, and often easier than backtracking to your airlock through multiple enemies. Tip number 4 is pretty simple. You don't always have to overstay your welcome. Especially when you're just starting out, sometimes just getting into the airlock, clearing your first 2 or 3 rooms for loot, and then getting out can be a really good way to stock up on gear and crafting materials. Especially when you're first starting out, the maps can also be kind of confusing, and the farther in you get, the harder it is to backtrack properly to your airlock. It's often better to extract with what you have than it is to find all the loot on the map and die to an ambush before you can find your ship. So don't feel bad for doing quick loot runs and just getting out alive. My next tip is more of a psychological one, and that's to not get too attached to your gear. If you've played other games like Tarkov or DayZ, you might be aware of the concept of gear fear, or not wanting to lose some shiny piece of equipment because you don't know if you'll be able to get it back. In my experience in Marauders, basic raiding gear is pretty easy to come by. Almost every AI enemy in the game will have a decent gun, ammo, and more often than not, they will also have some kind of armor, helmet, or even a backpack. You also have a pretty small stash for your gear anyways, and it fills up quick. So treat most gear like it's disposable, don't be afraid to sell or scrap basic weapons, and remember that it's often better to bring home crafting materials than it is to put bulky weapons in your backpack. For tip number 6, we're going into the crafting system a little bit. To unlock crafting schematics, you need to level up by gaining XP, and you'll be given tokens at each level to spend on crafting recipes. You also spend some of your cash as well. While some of them may seem expensive, these crafts are pretty important in helping you build a full basic loadout. I would highly recommend unlocking crafts for basic stuff like the sack bag, light backpack, bandage, small first aid kit, scout ship, and ammo for your preferred weapons as early as possible. Another item that you should probably get a crafting schematic for as soon as possible and bring one into almost every raid you do is the lockpick. It's really useful to get behind locked doors, open locked containers, and you're gonna wish you had one as soon as you find a locked item. You can find a lot of this stuff as loot, but for the times when you run out, it's definitely going to pay off to be able to craft a first aid kit, a backpack, or ammo for the gun that you want to take out. On the topic of first aid kits, the healing system in Marauders could use a little explanation as well. It's honestly really simple, but it's not really explained to you that well in game. The most basic healing items are food and water, which generally heal a pretty small amount, but they're also very common to find pretty much anywhere. Next up, you have bandages, which heal more than food, somewhere around 10 to 15% of your health. After this, you have small and large first aid kits, which restore the most amount of health. Small first aid kits are pretty easy to craft once you buy the schematics, and I try to take one into every raid to heal up after a big fight. There's also painkillers like methyl and morphine, which can restore your maximum health. When you take a lot of damage, you'll notice part of your health bar turns white instead of green, and this cannot be refilled unless you take a painkiller of some kind. So keep an eye on your health bar and use painkillers so you can stay at full HP. My next tip is a pretty simple one to control your recoil when shooting a lot better, and that is to try and quickly tap fire shots whenever possible instead of holding down and spraying in full auto. The recoil in Marauders gets out of hand very easily if you spray and pray, but on a lot of weapons you can fire just as fast by rapidly clicking your fire button, and you end up with a lot less recoil when shooting this way, so it's much easier to keep your shots on target. Another thing I would say here is that hip fire on weapons is generally not the greatest, and the recoil kind of feels exaggerated when you're not aiming. So keep control of your shots by tap firing, and don't panic spray from the hip if you want to keep your accuracy. Coming in at number 9 is another pretty simple piece of advice, and that's to read the description of every item that you aren't immediately sure what its purpose is. A lot of items are really obvious, like a gun is to shoot at people. However, there are quite a few items in Marauders that don't have an obvious purpose until you read the description, like the blowtorch, tokens to unlock depots, or valuable items that you might need for contracts. Certain items like the gold ring can be sold or turned in for a contract quest. The blowtorch can be used to cut open locked vaults, and others like war bonds or coins are just great for selling to make money. Knowledge is power, so read the descriptions and don't leave behind anything that says it might be valuable or used to unlock something. Finally, for the magic number 10, don't forget to accept your contracts and try to complete as many as you can. You can have 3 active daily contracts, and there's sort of a solo contract questline as well, and each one rewards XP, money, and gear that can really help you make progress. It can be kind of confusing to find some of the specific items and areas needed for these quests at first, but it gives you a reason to explore the space stations, and the rewards are really helpful. These contracts also reward reputation with the different traders, and can unlock things like extra items to buy, crafting schematics, and cosmetics, so they're definitely worth it. Well, that pretty much covers it for this one, and I hope you find this video helpful in figuring out Marauders a little bit. It's still a pretty new experience for everyone, so undoubtedly there's stuff that I missed, don't know about, or don't understand yet. But that all comes with time, and this was more aimed at helping people get started on the right foot. I'm pretty excited to see what comes next in Marauders. It's a really interesting game with excellent atmosphere, and I hope to see it fleshed out more as time goes on. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and if I missed any good tips that you think people should know, throw that in the comments as well. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got links to my Twitch channel and Discord server down below for anyone interested. And until next time, stay safe out there, Marauders.